We're good. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I was saying, I like to keep it 45 to an hour long just because they are YouTube videos, and let's face it, there's some videos out there that are like 5 hours long, right? Nobody's got time for that, right? So I like to make it quick, sweet, and don't get me wrong, like I was saying before, the way that I learned Rhino was actually all by myself, right? Nobody taught me. I had to learn and basically YouTube and search and read forums and ask questions of other people on Reddit, just to solve stuff. So I'll definitely be that resource for you guys, right? What's nice is now someone in college has seen the need for computer graphics, right? And for good reason. Every transfer school, the architecture program, is definitely going to expect you to either know Rhino, at least a little bit of computer programs in general, such as the Adobe Suite, and they'll be looking for it even in your portfolio when you do transfer, especially now, right? In fact, some of the submissions for portfolios are entirely digital now. You don't even send a copy in, where back in my day, that's what we did. We had to buy all these copies ourselves, and of course hand them out and distribute them, right? It was quite pricey. However, now we're in the digital realm where there's a lot of opportunities, and I would say it's clearly the way in architecture today, right? We definitely use a plethora of digital technologies. So I really want to start from the basics and really just talk about modeling and diagramming, which is really what exercise 1 is about. Usually I'm going to go ahead and put the assignment kind of like a day-by-day thing. We didn't really do anything on the 27th, so I could probably switch that to the 29th, and of course put our assignment there. Very regularly, I'll pretty much ask for you to put a screenshot of your work, or just save it as a JPEG, or what have you, usually a PDF actually, and we'll be posting them together and looking at them together. If you're still unfamiliar with maybe the Miro, both of the links are on the Canvas announcement. Right, so feel free to sign up. It is free, and it saves you $20 a month, so that's always good. However, we got to start from the basics. So if you want this base file, it's not actually required, but it is pretty nice in terms of getting familiar with and practicing with some of the program, or I should say the commands, right, such as trim, extend, fillet. And if you've had me, of course, for graphics too, you probably know about some of the two-dimensional ones, but we're going to dive into, of course, the three-dimensional as well. What's really nice is that in this digital software, we can build something in 3D and immediately make it 2D. We can draw something in 2D and not necessarily immediately make it 3D, but we can definitely make it easier on ourselves to, of course, model something. Now, we're going to start off pretty small, and we're going to start off with diagramming, right? So if you actually take a look, and let's just take a look at it together. Let's take a look at the assignment. Sack. Teach way too many courses. Fall. Exercise 1. So this is the handout that I gave you guys today. So let's, of course, take a look at it. Rhino 2D and Rhino 3D. Right? Our first exercise will be starting small. However, our goal is to start working in a way of which an architect might in the professional world. We start the exercise with a scaled space and are provided a base file in the correct units and with some common commands found in Rhino. We will start with a box 25 feet by 25 feet by 25 feet. Then follow the vague instructions below to show our steps in diagram. The point of this exercise will be to use Rhino 3D space effectively and to show the manipulations that you apply in a communicative step-by-step diagram. The manipulations themselves aren't important in their design, but how the manipulations are displayed. A minimum of 3 steps must be shown at an isometric view. The final diagram will be composed on an 11 by 17 paper, and of course Miro. Since the final object is not what is important, think sculptural composition. Now, what I mean by vague instructions is, well, very often, especially if you take another computer course, it was actually kind of funny at Texas Tech, they wouldn't do this, right? They wouldn't even go over Rhino. In fact, there was kind of a theory that they didn't even know the programs. They were just, kind of like, here, learn the program. Which I would definitely have to agree. I don't think some of those professors actually knew the programs, but what they always gave was actually just a vague amount of instructions and said, have at it, right? So I'm not going to do that to you guys today. In fact, I'm going to do the entire assignment in this one video. Now I'm going to go pretty fast, so of course that's why it's recorded, so you can always pause the video, check out what I clicked on, because, well, there's a lot of information here, and I'm basically going to treat it like you've never used Rhino before, right? However, some of us, we may be pretty familiar already with Rhino and could easily get started with these vague instructions, but let's go over it. And of course I have some examples to kind of give a feel of where we're going for, right, and what we're trying to get at. So that being said, our first step is of course to create a 25 by 25 foot box. Now, well, there's a little bit of caveats to that. I need to make sure that it's of course in the right units first, so I'm simply going to type in units. When I do that, it's going to bring it up and actually tell me that I'm in feet. I could easily switch it to inches, miles, literally parsecs. How crazy is that? Anybody know what a parsec is? It's huge. Anyway, not important. But we do want to make sure that it is in some sort of units that we're familiar with. By default, it's usually in millimeters, which I don't know about you, but I don't know my millimeter conversions to inches, let alone feet, right? I think 1 inch is 23.4 millimeters. But again, who wants to do those calculations all the time? So do make sure that you're in a correct units. And how cool is that? You can just click it at the edge of a button, right? After that, we essentially want to make a box. I know it sounds intuitive enough, but we just type in box. Once we do that, you'll find that at least on the Mac side, your command bar can be found on the top left. If you're on Windows, you usually find it at the bottom or right at the top of your toolbar, right? So you should see a command bar that you can type in just about anything. Once you do type in something, you can hit enter to enact the command. And once that's done, you'll actually see a series of usually instructions of what kind of inputs the program is asking for. So in this case, it's asking for the first corner of the base. I can honestly click anywhere, right? In my case, I'm just going to start in the middle. I can click anywhere, and after I click, I'm going to type in 25 foot symbol, enter. And you'll see that it kind of locks into that first x-axis. I can do 25 feet y, and then you really can't see it because it's in the z direction, but if I click on, say, the perspective view, we can kind of see what's going on there. I can type in 25 feet again and enter. And of course we got our box. Not too shabby. Just to explain the UI a little bit, which is the user interface, especially on the Mac, I think it's a little weird. To be honest, I prefer the UI side of the Windows. I think it's a little easier to look at, a little easier to read. And they're starting to go to this tab thing that, of course Adobe has made so proficient for us. But I got a lot of stuff open and I don't want to confuse you guys just yet, right? So I'll try and keep it a little bit more simple. Usually I have my layers on. Of course, this little color wheel would be your properties of any said object. So right now I have the viewport enacted, so it's going to bring up the properties of my viewport. If I click on this box, it's immediately going to bring up the properties of that box, or that object in this case. So another thing I want to get us familiar with is definitely the vocabulary that's used in the digital realm. What's nice, Rhino uses a very universal vocabulary. So very often, if you're talking about an object file, well, that's key language to somebody else, maybe working in Revit or working in 3ds Max, because it's the exact same thing, at least code-wise. And I won't get into the computer science of it, but basically we're working in an NURB and mesh program, right? And what's nice is, of course, that Rhino does both simultaneously, whereas like Revit doesn't work in meshes so well. Whereas, if you're 3D printing, you want meshes. Anyway, all kinds of language, of course, used in the realm. Now you have a series of tools, usually by standard, right? And you'll see that you actually have tabs at the top that even change the rules or all the different commands. We have visibility, transform, curve tools. We really won't get into that today, which is why, I've even made a standard for myself and for us, right? So that we can have some 2D tools and some 3D tools. But sweet, we got the first. And I like to be organized. So I'm going to create a rectangle. I'm going to change my layer. I can always add a new layer, so I can right click and really just line work is what I'm going to call this one. I can always double click on a layer to enact it. You'll see a little check mark come up if you're on the Mac. I think it just kind of turns a different color on Windows. And I can type in rectangle. The reason I want to do this is because, well, I want to keep an 11 by 17 kind of workspace, and I want to be organized. To be honest, this can get really complex really fast, and it's a infinite amount of space. You can get lost pretty easily in the digital realm. So I don't know, I like to keep myself kind of bounded a little bit. So in my case, I'm going to do 11 feet by 17 feet just to keep the ratio. Like I said, and actually you can tell in the assignment, it says nothing has to be to scale yet. So I just need to keep that ratio. So one thing you may notice is that when I click on an object, a few things sort of pop up, right? Such as this little bar that, well, if I hover around it, even says that it's a rotate tool, right? So you'll see if I click on that and I hold shift, I could quite literally rotate the object. And if you notice that these three little axes and rotate little bars don't pop up, it's because you probably don't have Gumball enacted, right? So you'll see at the bottom if you're on a Mac, and I think it's actually a checkbox on Windows, right? So be on the lookout for that. It's called Gumball. But yeah, it's a very useful tool, and you can see if I turn it off, right? If I click on something, it just sort of highlights, right? Not a lot of stuff there. I mean, I could still move it, and arguably not the way that I wanted to, right? But again, I think Gumball's one of the best tools ever. I don't know why it's called Gumball, but it is a nice name. Makes me think of that show Gumball from Cartoon Network. Anyway. So this is what I mean by sort of controlling my steps. I could even be more organized and type in text. And go, well, I want this to be actually called step 1. I don't know, I might be actually doing my design project. I might be doing a lot of things. It could be a precedent study over here, a modeling study over there, maybe a mass model over there. So again, I want to be as organized as possible, and I may be very well working in a group or a team of 12, and they definitely need to know what I'm doing. So it's a really good habit to get into for sure. I'm going to go ahead and make step 1. Again, using Gumball, I can hold shift and really click on any of those toggles and keep myself organized, right? What's nice is in the digital realm, we can copy something quite easily. So I can highlight everything, type in copy, enter, click, and even hold shift to, again, just be more organized. I'm kind of a perfectionist. I'm very OCD, so I like things to be, you know, really straight. My wife is always pissed I'm like moving the books on the table and stuff like that. But it does make a good architect, right? We like order, we like perfection. But I like to make copies of my step just in case, you know, I mess up or anything like that. You can double click on this little top piece right here. It's also known as a viewport, right? You'll notice that you have multiple viewports by default, and in fact, if you have multiple screens, you can have as many as you want. In fact, you can change them as well. So like if you click on this little down arrow, we can change the shade in which it's shown to us. So for instance, I can select ghosted, and it's going to show our objects kind of ghosted, so I can kind of see step 1 through my object. Again, maybe not what we need so far yet, but at the same time it's available to us. I particularly like to stay in shaded mode. It works for my computer a little bit better in its processing, especially while I'm recording such as this. But you know, if I wanted to change the view, I could even set it to a top view, a bottom view, left view, right view, front view, back view, perspective, 2-point, isometric. Hey, there's that thing I was asking for in terms of the view. So that might come in handy, especially since I need it for this assignment. But again, there it is. I mostly work in a top view, and this may be actually most familiar to you. If you've ever worked in AutoCAD, you were constantly looking at a top view, right? However, it probably wasn't as easy as double clicking and seeing all 4 views, right? Such as seeing the elevation at the same time as seeing the right. However, you'll notice that I can zoom out into oblivion, right? So if that be the case, I can always click on an object maybe that I know, or I can even sort of just select everything in a project. I can click on this little magnifying glass, which is known as zoom selected. Again, this is why I record these things, so because these buttons at first can be quite, what did that look like? To me, I'm always explaining what it looks like in the icon. So in this case, it looks like a cell division under a magnifying glass, right? So if you click on that, if you're enacted in the viewport, it'll immediately bring it right up, right? So if you're lost in space, as I call it, and you click on something, right, we can bring it right back into view. And again, sometimes that's really helpful, especially if we're diving into something really specific in a project and we just want to look at that little piece. Definitely a great tool to know about. Let's move on to step 2. Subdivide the box into 9, a 3x3 grid. Now that's pretty vague, so I'll show you what I mean. And to be honest with you, there's about 9 different ways to subdivide something in Rhino. I'm just going to go over one, and I'm going to go over the one that I find most basic. It's not actually, I would say, the simplest, but I'll leave it up to you. Now that you know the vocabulary, all I'd have to do is type into YouTube how to subdivide an object in Rhino 3D. And in fact, you're going to get even way better and more specific videos than even I've made, right? So definitely expand your repertoire, if you will. Sorry to use French today, but in the knowledge that you gain for this program, right? Because to be absolutely fair, I'm not the best person in the world that does Rhino every day. In fact, there are people, YouTubers, that do this as a job, just teaching Rhino, right? Or Revit, or all these other multitude of programs. But it's not necessarily always about architecture, right? So my videos are at least about this class, and very specifically to this class. Anyway, so we need to subdivide it into a 3x3. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on my step 2. I can title it step 2. Again, I like to be super organized. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. The way I like to do it is actually using Wirecut, and I think I use that somewhere. Yeah, Wirecut. So you can kind of get an idea of what we need to do to actually do Wirecut. If you take a look at the steps, did you guys ever build clay models in school? Like, you know, and they'd come out with a string, there's this big block of clay, and they'd cut off a piece for everybody, right? Usually they used a piece of string, and they would tie it around it, and they would slice it, right? And it sliced it really nice in the same axis as that you put the string, right? In this case, I like to call it the digital wire cut, because essentially that's what we're doing. We're able to cut this piece of clay in any shape that we want to. So, for instance, what I was showing you guys here was that you can take, well, the wire and the object, and you can simply wire cut any shape out of an object. Now, this is a game changer in architecture because you're constantly being asked to manipulate something or cut it or subtract from it or add to it, right? So probably one of my most favorite tools, so I've got to teach it first, right? But we need to subdivide it, so I'm going to need some lines to subdivide it. So let's go ahead and draw some lines. You'll see that I constantly go back and forth between my viewports as well. It's something that you, like playing a piano, you got to get used to it. You start not even having to look at the keyboard or even your mouse. So definitely practice. In our case, I'm just going to type in a line and I'm going to subdivide it, right? So maybe that's my first line. Why do that over and over again when I can just copy it? You know, maybe I want some hierarchy, so I'm going to go with like a medium, maybe a large cut, and then kind of a small. Why do more when I can just copy it? So I'm going to hold shift and copy it this way. I'm going to take those two, and oh, gumball's enacted, so I can hold shift and rotate it, and I can just move those lines across. Again, this 10 years ago, that would have taken like 10 minutes, right? It's so great to see that Rhino 8 gets better and better. But I can further change my subdivisions, again, maybe maintaining some sort of hierarchy. You know, maybe I got a medium size, large size, and maybe a small size with a large. Those are kind of looking the same. Let's take that one. But what's nice is, you know, I can sort of move that around, right? So we have some subdivisions so far. And, well, I do want to go completely three-dimensional. So let's take those two as well. I'm going to make another copy. Maybe on the outside. I like to work in multiple viewports so I can kind of see what's going on. I'm going to move that one there. And as you can see, I'm trying to subdivide it this way as well, So again, maybe a big, medium, small situation. Like I said, the design really isn't important here. It's really just about learning the tools. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. But I also need to show my steps. So for this exercise, I like to compare it to if I were to ask you to make me a diagram about making a bowl of cereal. What would you start off with? Maybe the ingredients. Maybe show a box of cereal, with Raisin Bran on it. I'd want to have the bowl. I'd want to get some milk, maybe the spoon, and maybe show all the pieces that I'm going to use, right? Maybe I just go right into step one and I start showing the cereal being poured into the bowl, right? But do remember, you want to show these steps. If I end up just sort of getting rid of all my work, well, I might have to do a bunch of steps over again, right? Why work harder when I can work a little bit smarter? So what I want to do is, well, I may want to show the lines that I use before I cut it. So what I like to do is make a step 2.1. Again, the power of copying can go a long way because I don't have to do that all over again. I can simply just copy that step and I may mess up. So, I've got a copy before I messed up. Now I can get rid of the one I did mess up and try again. And again, maybe I'm at step 25, right? I don't want to do 25 steps again, right? So when in doubt, of course, get in the habit of making a copy. And of course, in my case, being organized. So I'm going to go with step 2.1. And really, you don't have to do it exactly like myself. Of course, make it your own, but just want to give some helpful tools out there. So let's go ahead and do Wirecut. I'm going to type in Wirecut, enter. It's going to go, hey, Wirecut, awesome. Select the objects that you would like to cut. This one, sweet. Press enter. Once I do that, it's going to go, well, how do you want it cut, sir or ma'am? And in my case, I'm going to tell it I want it to go straight through this box, right? In my case, I might have to do one at a time because, well, as you can see, it's going, hey, do you want to go this way or that way? So it does look like I have to do one at a time. Not a big deal though. So let's choose this Wirecut. Object, enter, slice it through, and I'm going to go this way or that way. Honestly, doesn't really matter. Once I click, it's going to go, hey, do you want to delete this? And I'm going to be like, you know what? Keep it, right? So there's a little keep it option. You can also type in the first letter that you see. That's why it's underscored right there. So if I even just type the letter K, it'll also keep it as well. On the Mac, it actually is a checkbox. I think in the Windows, it's actually either the letter K, or you can actually click on the command bar itself, which is pretty useful. So that's sweet. I'm going to press enter, and it's going to subdivide it for me now into 2 pieces. Sweet. Continue from there. Like I said, this one isn't the best way. You can also subdivide in many different ways, but I'll let you figure that out yourself. I like to teach Wirecut because it can be a little confusing, and it definitely is probably the most useful tool I've ever had in architecture. So let's keep subdividing. I can also cut multiple objects at a time. So of course I want to do that. Cut through, go this way, keep it. I want to cut this one as well. And I can even select the object first. I can type in Wirecut. It's going to ask me the opposite step. It's going to go, hey, I got the object, but where's the cutting curve? So in this case, I'll select the cutting curve, go through, and get out. Pretty subdivided so far. Definitely got a 9x9 at the top, but I really want a 3x3 on each and every side, right? So we're, what is that, 9 times 3? 27 boxes. And just to get a better look at it, so far so good. Looks like I'm going to need these pieces as well. One thing to also show you guys, and this is pretty universal for any digital program, is you'll notice when I go and click and go to the right, if I don't have the entire object selected, it doesn't select anything. You're like, what gives, man? And that's really the same for AutoCAD or Adobe or anything like that, just in case you're unfamiliar. However, it's different when you go to the left. If it touches that box, it'll select it, and that can be very useful. Especially when you're trying to get just one thing that's maybe surrounded by a bunch of things. Well, you just maybe want that one line, not the entire thing, right? However, keep in mind, I can also hold Command if I'm on Mac and deselect something. If you're on Windows, you'll have to hold Control and you can deselect something. If I want to add it back, I can hold Shift and click on it again. Fair enough, right? Of course, I want to cut all these shapes, so I'm going to hit enter. Oh, wrong one. I need to cut them with this guy. So I'm going to grab them all, hopefully. There we go. I'm going to type in wire cut again, enter, and select the ones that I want to cut. In this case, it's asking me first the direction in the Y, or Z axis, sorry. So again, I just want to get outside the box and slide it through. Sweet, and you can see that line pops up. Again, I want to take all those bottom pieces. I can hit spacebar to enact the same command that I just did. Saves me some time. I don't have to type in wire cut over and over again. Click. In this case, I want to get outside the box and go straight through. And sweet. We have a pretty subdivided box. However, I do want to think about diagram, you know? So, I don't know, I might want to kind of show that in a unique way. So I'm going to actually maybe take my lines out a little bit, because I kind of want to get this slicing motion. I don't know, what comes to mind for me is like, have you guys ever worked at a deli, right? And you kind of have those slicing machines, and like the whole ham kind of has all these section views, if you will, right? I don't know, I always relate food to architecture, and I think we all can kind of relate to food sometimes. I used to work at Carl's Jr. too, so it scarred me quite a lot. Anyway, so yeah, I might want to take these out, because after all, I do need to show my work. So I don't know, maybe I show some slices from the top, some slices from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and make that maybe a new layer and call it, I don't know, slice work. Because again, I don't know if I'm going to use this or not, but I do want to keep myself pretty organized for studio. I'm going to make color blue, get fancy with the colors, why not? Double click, and of course it'll extrude for us in that layer. So in my case, I'm going to use extrude, again another command that I showed, and in my case I kind of want to go and show it sort of halfway through the box. I think that might be kind of cool. I don't know, definitely looks like a pretty cool diagram, and maybe even gets the point across, right? Maybe I don't even show all of them going through, right? Maybe I can even sort of grab my little blue tool, sorry you couldn't really see it in there, and maybe I show them about to be sliced, right? Almost like the bowl of cereal. I can think of the diagram, right? I could show myself pouring the cereal, but I also can show like the cereal falling out of the box, right? And that really communicates they're making a bowl of cereal, right? It may even communicate the kind of cereal I'm using, or how much, or it can really communicate a lot of things. So in this case, these slicers could really indicate, I could start to put an arrow on them. You know, again, I might be talking to somebody in Japan and they don't even know English, but they'll know my diagram and they can easily tell how to make a bowl of cereal. That's pretty universal. In our case, we're trying to show them how to slice this box, or at least how we slice the box. So I may need to add a few things to get that point across. But sweet, we got what we need. And like anything, I'm gonna make another copy, because why would I want to do that again? Now in the copy, I can of course get rid of things that I don't need. I can zoom out a little bit, click, and well, I've already got some of those steps, and you know, maybe some of this stuff is actually in the way now, so I can get rid of it because, well, I have it in the previous step. And let's go ahead and see what step 3 is. Remove 3 to 4 pieces. I mean, that sounds pretty easy. However, I do want to compose it. After all, I am an architecture student and I'm going for composition and maybe going for an interesting design. I don't know, you might be quite inspired by this process and be like, you know, I see a building here. You know, I kind of see spaces. And of course, you're welcome to imagine. And as you can see, as I've even shown in our little diagram, it's kind of like that base file right there, showing some of these pieces, of course, being removed. So it says 3 to 4 pieces. Yeah, try and keep it at 3 and 4, even though honestly you can subtract a few more if you'd like, if you're just kind of not finding the right spaces, right? You could also start over and subdivide it a different way too, right? But for our case, let's go ahead and get rid of some of those pieces. I may want to show this, right? I mean, I guess I do have that piece there, but again, I'm going to go with a 3.1 actually. Again, I just want to be safe. I don't know what I'm actually going to do, especially in studio all the time. I mean, let's face it, I'll come up with some sort of idea and then be inspired midway. I'll have some sort of dream at 4 o'clock in the morning, wake up and change my entire design, right? But at the same time, my professor wants to see that dream. What was this realization that caused you to change your entire project? Well, sir or ma'am, I had a dream, right? And I can't tell you that enough. How many solutions have come to me just by relaxing? So anyway, word to the wise. So we got a piece. I'm gonna make a copy, put it off to the side, just in case. And I can go this way as well. Again, just keeping myself pretty organized. So let's go ahead and remove some. I kind of want to show one maybe going up. I don't know, maybe this one, or I kind of want that center one. So one thing that I can do is I can hide an object, and I know it's quite intuitive. I just type in hide, and it's gonna hide it. So I can take maybe this one, maybe slide that one out, or to kind of show that, you know, maybe I had to remove one to get the other. So maybe pop that one out a little bit. So there's two already. And let's make this pretty visually interesting. So maybe that one goes over here, kind of like that one going over there, kind of get a little space in there. And I don't know, I kind of start to see a little house. You'll start to see that whatever object that you're clicked on, it really tries to keep that in the view. So since I have this one enacted, you can see that the camera, when I rotate or pan, that is trying to keep enacted on that. You can always click another object and of course go to that one as well, or reset it with our zoom extents, right? And it's gonna really focus in on that object. And now when I pan, it's really gonna focus on that one, right? So again, this is a pretty useful tool so that you can start to see what you're doing. You know what? I'm gonna get fancy with the spices. My professor said I could remove more than 4. I'm gonna go ahead and do so. Why not? So maybe I get rid of that one and I don't know, that one. So I'm gonna go with a total of 5. Why not? He said I could. Plus, I'm all about breaking the rules anyway. But that's looking pretty good. I don't know, maybe I have one more even popping out here. Why not? Oh. Of course, in my case, I'm gonna use Gumball so that I can sort of keep that axis going. Sometimes it can be a little hard to actually click on. You have to kind of change your view a little bit and get those removed. I do want to give it enough space, and I could even test out some things, right? You guys saw that I could right click and change it into an isometric view. So let's go ahead and do so. I mean, let's check it out. What's nice is it's gonna lock it into that isometric view. As soon as I zoom in though, it's gonna keep that view, but if I right click and sort of rotate, it's gone, right? And honestly, very hard to get back into a perfect isometric. So you might as well get familiar with the views. Isometric, as we saw, northeast would kind of give us that view. That would mean southeast is kind of the view that I'm looking for. Sweet. And that's looking pretty good so far. However, I do kind of have some overlap. So I may want to, you know, set up for myself to give myself a little space there, right? I don't know, maybe I kind of want that overlap. It doesn't look too bad, at least in some cases, and that one's going to come out pretty nicely. Maybe that one's actually a little too far. And maybe actually that one's a little too far as well. Oh, actually it was just right. I just want a little bit of space there, right? I don't want to go too far out. And hopefully you guys can already kind of squint a little and start to see the diagram, right? You can start to see this thing sort of being exploded, and it's communicating, hey, those boxes were removed, right? In my case, a little bit more than 4, but I'll leave it up to you, right? I would say at least 3 or 4, right? Just because, well, we want to see some sort of change to this object. May have gotten too far with this one. Maybe I put that one back. So I can move it. What's nice about this is I can literally select the point that I want to click back into and lock on to another point. Now, you'll notice if you don't have those little things, let me just do that again. You might not have OSnap enacted. I know, that's a funny name, OSnap. Anyway, I think it stands for Object Snap, but it's been like that since high school and we've always snickered at it, but obviously that joke has run its course. Anyway, on the Mac you'll see it either at the bottom by default or on the side. I have it to the side because I use it all the time, so it's a little easier for me to put it over here. On Windows, it's definitely at the bottom, and you'll see it actually as a series of check boxes, right? If you're just absolutely new to Rhino. Now, by default, usually it has nothing. I like to keep end on, point, mid, intersection, and perpendicular on, just because those are pretty common. I like to use them. Near is really dangerous, but again, a useful OSNAP tool. So you'll notice that when I hit move and I click on a button, you'll see that some words pop up. It's going, hey, this is the end and the intersection, right? But if this is disabled, it's sort of arbitrary. I don't really know if I'm clicking on that point or not. So be very careful when you're moving stuff in three-dimensional space, right? You don't want to accidentally move this, right? And it looks correct, but find out that of course it's been absolutely skewed. Look at that. Oh my gosh. It looked correct in the perspective, but in fact I accidentally moved it dramatically, right? So be very careful about not using OSNAP. In our case, there's my zoom selects again. A wonderful tool and saves us a lot of time. So I want to go ahead and move this back into place. So I want my OSNAP to be on, and it's going to quite literally tell me, and it even sort of flashes. You can kind of see the little yellow flashes. It didn't even used to do that. I mean, Rhino's come a long way. So we can take that piece and we can quite literally put it exactly where it needs to be. Again, a very useful tool. So that's looking pretty good. Maybe what's our last step? Apply wire cut or Boolean operation to 4 of any of the pieces, right? So what does that mean? Apply a wire cut or Boolean operation to 4 of any pieces, right? So what that means is definitely not the pieces that we removed. I know that's a little too vague, but again, the reason why I'm doing this. So let's get that piece and let's just take the whole thing. I mean, why not? Copy. Who wants to do that all exactly again? Not me. But now I already have this set up for my step and to show my process, so I can go ahead and get rid of these and just mess again with the final object. So basically what I'm asking for is to use another shape, right, or wire cut, or just kind of start to manipulate this thing as a whole. And you'll see that that can be a little bit tricky based on whether we use a wire cut or a Boolean operation. So in my case, it says to do it to 3 to 4 pieces. This is not to be taken to do it 3 or 4 times. In fact, you really only have to do this once, and I just want you to try to affect 3 or 4 pieces. So in our case, well, I don't know, it's looking pretty massive over here. Maybe I kind of subtract something from these 3 pieces. Maybe I can do the operation twice and I subtract from that piece. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and use a sphere just to kind of mess with the orthogonalness that this is already created, right? It's pretty orthogonal. So I want to get fancy with the spices and go ahead and make a sphere. I can also just type in sphere or click on this object. If I hold it, it'll actually give me a couple of options and other platonic solids that we can make. In my case, I want to use a sphere, and let's face it, there's like 7 different ways to make a sphere, right? Not too critical on how you want to make a sphere. Honestly, test some things out, guys. You'll find some that you like better than others or find more useful than others for sure. But let's go ahead and pick a 2-point sphere. That's one of my favorites because I can basically click on 2 points, bam, make a sphere. And basically that's based on the diameter of that sphere. Again, we're kind of going again into geometry. What's nice is, well, now I can sort of float it around. I can use my gumball tool and sort of start to see how it's interacting with my space. Now, what I want to do is subtract it, right? And so I might be like, that's not big enough yet, so I'm going to grab the gumball tool, maybe make it a little bit bigger, maybe a little smaller. And I definitely want to make sure that I affect and don't get little somethings like that, right? So be very careful, right? And to be honest, sometimes the operation works, sometimes the operation doesn't. Actually, that's a little big. So let's get a little bit smaller. And let's chop off that little piece as well. So I don't know, that's looking pretty cool. I don't know, I can't really see everything. So maybe if I right click and go to ghosted, oh, okay. I can see that it's affecting 1, 2, 3, looks like a 4th piece is in there. Oh, right, so it meets the requirements at least. So let's go ahead and subtract it from it. Now, well, I don't want to subtract this sphere from this object and this object and this object. It makes a lot more sense to really just put it all together, then subtract from the whole. So I'll take these red objects, and in fact, I can go back to my red object, and I can turn my blue objects off. thankfully, because I made a new layer. I'm going to go ahead and type in Boolean, right? And you'll notice there's actually a series of commands that are entitled Boolean. I call it Boolean just because, well, that's how I learned, right? I'm also very dyslexic and don't say a lot of words correctly. Go figure. Anyway, as you can imagine, they're pretty intuitive. So Boolean union, obviously, that means to bring stuff together. Boolean split, split stuff apart. Intersection, well, to be honest, that one's not very intuitive. Boolean difference, difference usually means subtraction, right? And Boolean two objects, honestly, does the same thing as Boolean intersection. I didn't make this program, right? But I've noticed they do the exact same thing. So anyway, in our case, we want to union them and make one solid object. You'll notice that it might even say, hey, that didn't work, right? In fact, it may even bring up an error, such as a text doc, just going, hey, this is where it failed. It's not exactly going to tell you why it failed, but it definitely failed, right? And that's okay. Let's try again. Maybe with just two objects at a time, or a couple, right? You'll notice, well, if they're not touching, they definitely won't come together, right? Let's try that again. So Boolean, union, enter, and we can see that, oh, okay, it didn't have a problem doing that at first. So I may need to sort of just kind of add to those pieces one at a time. And again, I can just hit enter again to enact the same command, or spacebar to enact the same command. In my case, the last one that I use is Boolean union, and as you can see, it's working. It's just working one piece at a time because, well, the computer actually has no idea what you're doing. And actually, this is my gripe with artificial intelligence. It's not really intelligence. Artificial intelligence is more like a switch in a room suddenly being sentient. And to be fair, in my honest opinion, I don't think technology will ever do that. That's why we're actually probably terrified and made movies such as The Terminator. Anyway, random facts for the day. But I wouldn't be too scared of AI. It's really just doing calculations of statistics really, really, really fast. But I don't know. It definitely won't take an architecture's job because it requires so much critical thinking and subjectivity that arguably will just never happen for AI. But anyway, that's my gripe with Elon Musk. Let's get these pieces together, enter, and voila, we're starting to get a more solid object, right? And it looks like we almost got all of them. Maybe there's a few missing. Let's hit enter again. And as you can see, well, it's becoming a problem for some of those, right? It's finding basically a point right here, and it's even telling us like, hey, this doesn't make sense geometrically or calculatively. And that's okay. We're not even cutting from that spot, so not really a big deal. What is a big deal is the spot that we're cutting from, right? And as you can see, we don't even touch this object, so not a big deal, at least for today. So let's go ahead and Boolean split it, or difference it, or Boolean two objects it. So we'll take that piece, the piece that we want to cut from. I'll do Boolean split or difference. That's also subtraction. And it's going to ask me, okay, what polysurfaces or surfaces do you want to subtract with? I'll click on the one that I want to subtract with, enter, and funny enough, it should have subtracted. Well, maybe it didn't. And actually, in your command bar, it'll usually tell you the error. On the Macintosh, it'll tell you at the very bottom left, and I honestly can't remember. I think it is also the bottom left for Windows as well. But it'll either say Boolean successful and give you the amount of objects that were cut, or it'll say Boolean failed, right? So I might need to try a different option, or maybe even move stuff around because clearly something's going on. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't really tell us what's going on, but, well, some things are impossible, right? For instance, it's having a problem with this little tiny triangle piece, so I'm going to select my object and just move it up a little bit, right? So I can get out of the way of that. Not a big deal. I'm not too worried about the design, just the operations. So I can, at least it flags something that tells me, hey, it's not working about right here. Now it doesn't tell us why, but again, tells us something. So let's take that piece, let's try again. Let's try Boolean split this time. After all, sounds like it. Let's take that piece, and as you can see, it started to cut away from it. What I like about Boolean split is that it keeps all the pieces for us. So again, I need to show my steps. So I might want to show that step. So I'm going to go ahead and make a copy first. And then I'm going to remove it, right? So I'm going to take my sphere, maybe show it off, coming to the side. And I could even show off the piece that it did cut, which is pretty cool sometimes, especially if, I don't know, maybe that becomes my architecture project. That's pretty cool. I mean, shoot, sometimes I see stuff and I'm like, bam, there's my project, right? There's the living room. I'm going to have a tower in my project, and I want the light coming in from the south side. I don't know, hopefully you guys have an imagination like I do. I can see a whole project in just the piece that I cut out, right? But what's nice is now I've got 3 separate pieces, and it really shows off what I did, except now that I rotated it. Anyway, but that's looking pretty good. All right, any more steps? No. All right, so maybe I want to show sort of the final object. That might be kind of nice. So I'll go ahead and make a copy of that one as well. Sweet. For our next part, we'll actually need Illustrator, right? Because to be fair, don't get me wrong, you could do a lot of line weights and colors and all these different layer things in Rhino. You could. And in fact, some professors like Professor Tunks, Longoria, and actually I don't know any others, they'll do this all within the same one program. And don't get me wrong, more power to you, right? However, I think it's also really beneficial to use Illustrator in the tools that it does well, right? Rhino does some really great things well. It models stuff, it keeps stuff organized, and I can move and draw stuff really, really well. Illustrator, not so much. I can't draw in Illustrator, at least accurately, especially the accurate way that we want in an architectural studio. So it makes a lot of sense to use the programs for their proficiencies, right? So in our case, let's get the drawing and the diagram and really the assignment first, right? So you'll notice, at least in our step, I need to show on 11x17 composition at least a minimum of 3 steps and the final object. Sweet. No scale yet, size to fit paper accordingly. Also sweet. Don't worry, we'll get into scale and things like that, but I do want to start us off pretty simple. Plus it's a simple 25x25 object. So, all right. So I don't need this for my final step. And to be fair, I guess I could be more organized, but to save on time for this tutorial, we'll go ahead and leave it right there. Now let's go ahead and actually make the project. So I'm going to go into my top view, and really I just need to start selecting the right steps to make that bowl of cereal, or in this case, a simple object. So I've already made 11x17 for myself, at least in ratio. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that rectangle and just kind of make it off to the side. Again, I'm just trying to always be organized, and thankfully I did, right? The next step and wonderful tool that we can use, especially if you guys already know it, it's called Make 2D. So I don't know, maybe I want to show the bowl of cereal first. I might have to do some critical thinking here, right? Maybe that's my first step, second step, third step, and final. I don't know, that sounds pretty good. And I have all the steps, and thank goodness I kept track of all of them, because now I even have a choice, right? And I don't have to go back and sort of fake it till I make it or post-rationalize something. So, pretty sweet. Let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and do this one as my first step. So I'm gonna select everything in there. I guess I don't really need this part. I just need the parts that I sort of use, right? And it's gonna get all of these lines, right? So I don't know, maybe I do just wanna start off with a simple box, or a simple box with the lines that I'm about to use to kind of show what I'm about to do. Either way, I'll let that decision be up to you. But really, in all the tutorials I do, guys, please don't copy me precisely, right? That is not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make you guys other Professor Verrettes. I'm trying to make you, and how you work in this space. I'm just giving really good advice to make that process go a little bit faster and finding yourself in the digital realm. In that case, all right, we've already got our piece. I'm going to deselect some of the stuff I don't need, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the view of that isometric view that I wanted. So in my case, southeast. Now what's nice is it's only going to make this view. So again, be very careful, don't accidentally skew it, don't accidentally move it, but it is okay if you zoom in or zoom out. The next step I'm going to type is make, and it's going to bring up make 2D, which, like the name says, it's going to make it 2D. How cool is that? I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and it gives us a couple of options. In fact, we can even start to show hidden lines, and if you've ever been in Graphics 1 or Graphics 2, you know all about hidden lines. We often have to show different parts of the object that we necessarily can't see if we're outside of the object. Sometimes we have to use other graphic tools in order to reveal some of the other information about an object. So I don't know, I'll leave that up to you. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck them just to kind of show you what's produced. I definitely want to group my output, otherwise everything is a single line. Don't worry, you can always ungroup something. And I find it a lot easier to ungroup something to regroup something. Another important is you want to maintain the source layers, especially if you are already very organized with your sourcing, right? So of course maintain those, that way it's a little bit easier to work with in Illustrator. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply, and as you can see, it made a flat version of what we were looking at. Nicely enough, it even selects it for us, and I can simply drag this entire piece over here. It's even grouped, so I can just make it smaller. Of course, using Gumball, and start to fit it on my page. After all, this is where I want to do my drawing, right? Sort of step 1, step 2. Arguably, I could even do my text here and get a lot of things out of the way, so I don't even have to do that in Illustrator. All I'm doing in Illustrator is changing colors and line weights. How easy is that? And arguably easier in Illustrator than it is in Rhino. Anyway, I digress. Let's go ahead and get some more steps in there. I think I mentioned this one. That one was looking pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get that one. I don't need my bottom rectangle, so I'm going to hold Control and remove that from my selection. Pretty sweet. Of course, I got to align my camera. Isometric, southeast. And I do want to pick the same view. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially if I'm trying to explain, you know, that bowl of cereal to somebody. I don't want to show them like the bottom of the bowl and then the top of the bowl and start to confuse them with all the different views. Even though you may very well know the object, doesn't mean that point is getting across in a diagram. So let's make 2D again. Let's of course maintain layers, and of course these will stay the same by default, and they change accordingly to whatever changes you made. That's looking pretty good. Go ahead and take that. Can you imagine how long this would take you to draft? It's a time saver, right? And you can really start to get complex with your objects. Don't really need to match a size or anything. It probably would be nice that these are of course the same size, but again, not really required. In fact, I might want to show them slightly getting bigger and bigger to show importance, or smaller and smaller to show less importance. Or maintain the exact same size, which I could do as well. And I could even start to make sure it is the same size. I could draw some more lines, and even draw construction lines. Again, I want to do all of my drawing in Rhino, but just so I can match the size of the object. And we're getting pretty close. So that piece, and dang, nailed it. That piece and that piece. That usually doesn't happen. Anyway, you get a sense of scale when you do this so often. All right, got step 1, step 2. Let's get step 3 in there. Maybe show that one. Yeah, that one seemed important. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to that one. Now I could try to stay in the same view, but I find it easier to kind of move the camera around to select something easier, and so that I can remove stuff as well. I don't find it that hard to just go to set view and go to isometric, southeast. Not a big deal for me. Type make 2D again, apply, and voila. Funny enough, it even gets the airs in there, and it's okay, you can delete those. In fact, I don't even think they actually print. I don't know, maybe I want to show this step a little bit bigger. Maybe it's a little bit more important. So that's looking pretty sweet. And yeah, you can get rid of the text dots. Again, it's just trying to tell me, hey, there's a geometric, calculatable error here. Some of this stuff well, that's kind of confusing. I may need to trim those or manipulate them a little bit more. Maybe I actually want to, how this is kind of a continuous surface. Maybe I kind of want to have that too. And if you remember, those are the two pieces that didn't go together when we did that Boolean union. So of course, the computer doesn't know what we're trying to do. It's just, of course, doing what it's told. So I'm going to take these pieces and I'm going to explode them. However, it'll be the most quiet explosion. Nothing will happen, right? You'll hit explosion and you'll actually just notice that, well, they're still together because they're grouped. So I need to ungroup them. How easy is that? But now they should be absolutely separate lines, which is nice because, well, some of these I don't need or want. So I'm going to get rid of them. Well, may want that one. So ungroup. And of course delete here. Now this process is way easier here than it is in Illustrator, right? Oh, I love Command Undo. Or sorry, in Windows also Control Z. Or Command Z in the Mac. So that's looking pretty good. Get rid of that one, maybe that one. And it's starting to look like a pretty solid object. So let's see. Ungroup again. And delete what I don't need. Sweet. It's actually looking pretty good. Now I need the final object, so maybe that one's kind of the bigger one. And maybe we make these look a little bit more together, right? Give it enough white space between the objects so nobody gets confused. Maybe that's a little too big. But again, you definitely want to do this here and not in Illustrator. Let's get our final object, looking pretty sweet. Make sure that you actually click on the view or the viewport that you want to make 2D, right? So if I make 2D right now, it's going to give me a top view because the top view is enacted. So just be sure, you have the right viewport. I'm still in the right view, but I always kind of make sure, I don't know if I accidentally moved it sometimes. So again, I like to just do it over again just in case. Make 2D, apply, and we can get our final object. Sweet. A little too big. It's okay. But yeah, now there's a nice hierarchy to this. I could start to label it step 1, step 2, step 3. I can start to put my name and logo at the bottom. Did I put that in the instructions? I usually do. Kind of like my design 1 or design 2 if you've ever been in my class. I'm definitely a fan of making your own logos and putting it to the bottom corner. Please let it have your initials involved, or at least some way that I can identify you. It doesn't have to be a little picture of your face, even though I did have one student put their face in there and they traced it with a bunch of lines. It was pretty cool because, well, how could you not know it was them, right? Plus they also had a strong brow and strong glasses, so he stood out. But I'll let that be up to you, right? At least have your name, right, so that we can identify you and we can start talking about the work or go, wow, so-and-so, you did really well here. What did you do to do that, right? It's really important that we're able to see each other's work and go, hey, how did you do that? Or how many clicks did that take? That's something we used to say at Texas Tech is, how many clicks did that take for you? And we're like, man, that took 1,000 clicks. And you're like, no, dude, don't even teach me how to do that. I don't want to be here forever. Or you'd have a guy go like, I did that in 6 clicks. And you'd be like, whoa, you got to tell me how you did that, right? And it was usually some other process. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is there's like an infinite amount of ways to do the exact same thing, right? Often, sometimes are longer, some are more efficient. Anyway. So that's looking pretty good. Our last step for today is to get it into Illustrator. For some of us, we already know how to do that. For some of us, it may be our first time. So I want to get rid of these text dots. And I kind of want to further line drawing this, right? I also need to, it looks like I'm actually missing a line. So let's get that line back involved. And let's make sure it's on the right layer, right? So what's nice about all of these layers, again, it's going to make 2D all the different layers for us. It's even going to separate and maintain those layers, which is really nice. But I can also add some more layers, right? You don't necessarily have to stay in the make 2D layers. I'm going to make my layer box a little bit bigger, and I'm going to use something a little bit more familiar, such as line weight. So just for short, I'm going to do LW for line weight, and I'm going to just arbitrarily do some numbers, right? So like line weight 5, I'm going to consider my largest. Let's do another one, line weight 3, maybe it's a medium, and maybe a line weight 1 for something really small. I also want to change the color, and again, I don't have to maintain these colors for real because I can change them in Illustrator. Now, if I was doing my line weight and stuff in Rhino, that's where it starts to get really confusing. I want all these gray lines, but my background is gray, right? So suddenly it looks like your lines are disappearing. Again, there's a reason why we use Illustrator. So in my case, I just want to make these colors stand out. So I'm going to use cyan, one of my favorite colors. I'm going to go with orange because, well, it stands out pretty well. And I don't know, magenta, again, because it stands out pretty well. Just so I can maintain my line weights. So in my case, well, I don't want to do all that work somewhere else. And I know that I may want, a strong edge line. So I'm going to hold shift, add to my selection. And as you can see, it really gets every little line in there. So kind of my non-shared edges, maybe I kind of want to bulk those up, if you will, kind of as like an outline. So I can do that. And I can right click on the layer and change object layer. It's really useful because bam, there it is. Yeah, and on the projector, the colors, I forgot, we have good projectors now. You can actually see all the colors. In my previous computer graphics courses, it was an absolute mess. I'd put the color orange and it looked green, on the screen. So that is a nice plus from being here. I might want some light line weight, especially for that line I missed. So I'm going to double click on my light line weight, type in line, and just draw it, right? I've got my O-snap going, so it's a cinch, right? It just locks on for me. And I can draw as many lines as I need. Or I can even change maybe even some of the line weights of others. Right, for instance, maybe, I don't know, maybe these all three I want to be light line weights. Just because it's the lines that are closest to us, so I kind of want to get that three-dimensionality with my line weight. And of course, this should be old hat, right? If you've had D1 or D2. Actually, is there anybody in here who hasn't had D1 or D2 yet? Good. So you're definitely learning. And I will say for those students, we don't take it necessarily slower, but I'm a little bit more lenient in terms of getting those concepts nailed down, right? However, if you're in D3 or D4, I'm a little harder on you, right? Because of course you should already know these things. But change object layer. All right, we're starting to get somewhere, right? And maybe I want a medium line in there. So I'm going to select everything I want to be medium. That probably is an edge line, and so is that. In fact, we could get really fancy and go polyline. I want to save some time. I mean, why would I sit there and do all that? So, I could just draw it, right? Oh. Polyline. And quite literally just trace over the line that I used. And what's nice is, well, as long as I have O-snap, it's gonna O-snap. Maybe it's just too early in the morning for jokes. I don't know. Anyway, as you can see, O-snap can be dangerous as well, right? So sometimes you do have to limit some of the things that you're using, such as intersection. Maybe I just need the endpoint, and sweet. That way, you definitely know that you got the endpoint. So in my case, I'm just getting an outline. Oops. And see, there's where the trouble. I can do edit undo, thank goodness. It used to actually redo the whole thing, so thankfully they've changed that. And you could just do, of course, Control Z. But again, I can draw it myself, right? I don't have to be limited to just modeling or just changing things like that. I may have a situation, of course, always hit enter to complete a command. Anyway, just trying to make sure I hit all the basics here. In some cases, you might want to make half of it dark and half of it light, right? Because, well, half of it is outside the object and half of it is inside the object, so I might need to break the line. So I just type in break. and it's going to ask me, okay, well, where are those 2 points that you want to break it? I'm going to select the point that I want to break, and I'm going to get really small and just make sure that it breaks a little. Don't worry, nobody even knows that those are 2 different lines, right? Because it is so microscopic, right? Anyway, I can take this line and I can make it this line weight. Oh, I don't want to change the layer. Change object. That little piece will turn orange. And maybe this piece, I want to, maybe both of those to be outlined. So, change object layer. And really nicely, we can get fancy with some of the stuff that you would normally do if you were drafting anyway, right? You'd kind of just intuitively go, oh yeah, I'm going to draw the whole thing, and then I'm going to bulk up these lines. So essentially what we're doing is the same thing. However, this is looking pretty good for the tutorial, and would you look at that? I meant to do it on that one. That's hilarious. Anyway, well, why would I do all that over again, right? I'm just going to take my final piece here, copy, and make it bigger. I mean, why not? It has all the things that I was about to do again. So again, I could use text, I could start to draw arrows or, things like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, we could still draw. So I could do a polyline, and just to kind of show you what that does. Right, we could start to draw sort of an arbitrary arrow. Of course, you need some good drawing arrow skills. I've perfected mine, thank you. But more or less, this is kind of what you want to end up with before you get into Illustrator. Some of the stuff, honestly, we can do in Illustrator. It's just not as easy as Rhino. So I'm going to take the whole piece. I'm going to file, export selected. Now, if you accidentally export, it's going to get everything. Very dangerous, right? Obviously not what we need, so I just want to export what I do have selected. Mostly because 3D objects don't go into 2-dimensional spaces, right? They just end up as, honestly, weird code. Anyway, in our case, we have a huge amount of files that we can go to. Again, why I like to use Rhino is because it can talk to all the other programs really, really well. In fact, if I need an object, if I need an STL, a step file, you name it, right? It is here. And in fact, they've even added Adobe Illustrator, which is there, right? An AI file. Now, in my case, I don't have a lot of success with that. For some reason, it depends on your Illustrator version, how well that works. But we'll go ahead and test it out today. I don't know, it could work today. I mean, I did install the latest update before school started, so we'll call this exercise 1, and we'll put it on my desktop just so I can find it. I'm also going to do another export, just because, like I said, there's like 16 different ways to do something. So if the AI file doesn't work for you, I do want to show you a second option. In our case, the AI file, you can also scale. Right, so that can be pretty dangerous. Now keep in mind, we don't need a scale for this one. So I just want to do a snapshot of the current view, right? After all, it's a vector file. If you don't know what that means, it just means, well, it's a line of code anyway. It's always going to be a straight line. However, a raster file, not the case. Anyway, so go ahead and export. And you'll see actually at the bottom it says file successfully saved. Wonderful. Now, I do want to do that again just to show you that, well, there are different files that open also in Illustrator. So, file selected, and tried and true, always works for me, is a DWG, the similar format that you would use in AutoCAD. So I'm going to hit DWG. I'm going to do exercise 1 again. Options. Well, it's going to bring up options again anyway. Or freeze my computer completely? No. And really what I want to do here is just make sure that I choose lines and really the youngest or most past year, right? In our case, like on Rhino 6 it says 2004 lines, and Rhino 8 it says 2007 lines. So, yep, 2007 lines, export. Export. I don't know why, but it brings it up again. It always has, probably always will. It's like, are you sure, right? Sweet. And it'll say file successful, and it even tells you the amount of lines you have, which is pretty cool. 325 curves. Yeah, for some reason it's called curves, even though they're lines. I didn't make this program. That's just the vocabulary that the digital realm uses. Lines are called curves. Curves are called curves. It's very confusing. Anyway. So now that we have that, we can minimize Rhino. Don't really need it anymore unless we needed to draw something else. We're going to go ahead and open up Illustrator. Now, most of the time we start a new file. That's honestly an option. You can start a new file, you can make it 11 by 17, and you can size it, accordingly. You can import your lines, but that sounds like a lot of work when I can just open the file. So I'm going to take my either DWG. Let's test my AI file first. So I'm going to go ahead and double click. And as you can see, it looks like there's absolutely nothing there. But if I zoom out a little bit, it might be somewhere. Where? Oh, there it is. And see, the reason for that, because you might be like, well, sir, why didn't it end up on the page? Well, if you notice in Rhino, the center of the page is actually here at the origin. So that's where that green line and that red line, you guys are all probably familiar in math class, it's called 0, 0, 0, right? Well, that 0, 0, 0 is also the middle of Illustrator, right? So since my lines are technically below it, it's going to be below the page. Keep that in mind, because sometimes eventually we're working way out here and we bring stuff into Illustrator and we're like, sir, I see nothing. In fact, it's off the Illustrator page. Just bring it back to the origin, or honestly, you can change your C-plane as well. That will solve that issue. Again, I don't know who's going to run into that, but somebody always does. Myself included just now. So let's go ahead and take that piece. We can take everything. And in Illustrator, you can kind of just move stuff. So as long as you hold the line, we can move it. And for our case, we do want it to be 11 by 17, so we want to do that first. I'm going to do Command R or Control R to bring up my ruler. And if I right click, I can select it from points to feet. Again, a really good standard rule is to always make sure your units are correct. So in my case, I'm going to switch to inches. That way I can make sure that I get an 11 by 17. And so far, it's gigantic, right? So I'm going to go to File, Document Setup, Edit Artboards, and change this artboard to an 11 by 17 up here. The height seems pretty close, but I need to go with 11 inches and by 17. Sweet. Now, since that I have that rectangle that's in the correct ratio, you guys may remember I used feet. Didn't really matter because, again, proportion is an amazing thing. So I'm going to take that piece and basically just get it to line up. So I want to get one side first, and you can see the program tries to kind of help you a little bit. Fake it till you make it. I'm going to hold shift, that way it stays proportional, and lock it onto the size of my paper. It should line up perfectly. Of course, if I wasn't so zoomed out, I can use the arrows a little bit. And again, I'm not too particular on the scale for this. We'll go over that when it's actually important, right? In my case, well, I can see some things and can't see the others. But what's really nice here, guys, is this beautiful thing right here. The layers that you created in Rhino are the same layers you can use in Illustrator. Now that's really important because, what if in Rhino I wasn't so organized and I did everything on the same layer? This next process is going to be a lot more difficult, right? So again, maintaining your layers and being as organized as possible is a really good habit. I can't express that enough. Because when I was learning this program, my God, I wish somebody would have told me to stay organized and maintain my layers. Because I was an absolute idiot sitting there for hours, clicking on every single line, changing it one at a time. And you better believe I got it done, but it took 8 times longer than it should have, right? Now for us, it'll be absolutely easy because you have a course on it. So in my case, I can turn everything off, I can turn everything on, and it's a very also intuitive program. Now, this is going to sound weird, but I want you to click on a space that doesn't exist outside the box, and you'll notice a little box of color comes up, right? What that does is it selects everything in that layer, and you can sort of see it in real time basically going, hey, is this what you mean? Is this what you mean? Is this what you mean? Which is a lot of my gripe with Illustrator. Anyway, I digress. But we obviously want to change these one at a time. And if you remember, my cyan was my light layer. So I'm going to make sure I click on everything. I'm going to go to this little color box here. This one is the fill, and this one is the stroke. Again, very confusing terms. I don't know why they called it stroke, unless they were basically kind of talking about maybe the strokes of a pen, maybe? I'm not sure. I didn't write these programs. Anyway, I wish they were a little bit more consistent though. But this is where I want to add my line weight, or, you know, maybe a color or two. But in my case, I'm going to maintain, I never want to use true black. Now, the reason for that is because the printer, the ink of black is very dark, right? And usually too demanding. In fact, you can see it in some of the projects outside that they use perfect black, and it's like super contrast between that white paper. Now, when you're in graphics class and you use that sign pen, or if you really look at it, it's not perfect black. It's usually a really dark purple. And then it even has kind of a sheen to it, right? And sort of this gray material rather than black. So at the end of the day, at least in my computer graphics class, what I want you to try to achieve is that drafting style, right? I almost want you to have somebody walk by and go, wow, that's a really nice analog drafting. And they're like, that's computer, right? You almost want to blend between somebody knowing if it was drafted or made in the computer. In fact, I find that the more this relationship is a little bit more human looking, the better the drawing looks, the better the client feels about the drawing, and the more you get paid. I mean, let's face it, we're all here to, you know, change our lifestyle in a way. Anyway, I know I was, but. So I'm gonna use sort of an off black, if you will. Still very dark, but will definitely make the difference. Up here at the stroke, I know it sounds hilarious, and if you don't see this, it's because, well, you need to be in Essentials Classic. That's where you're actually going to see all the tools. So if you're just unfamiliar with Illustrator, and maybe this is your first time, definitely use Essentials Classic. That way you have all the tools and options available to you. So I'm in Essentials Classic, and you know, I want this to be a pretty light line weight, and I do know that the limitation of a printer is 0.125 of a point. So I'm going to go with a little bigger than that, say 0.22. Why not? You know, fake it till I make it. And as you can see, it changed everything in there. I didn't have to select one line at a time. If I hold shift, I can also pan. And as you can see, it made a really nice line weight for us. If I zoom in, you know, it's that off black, and really nice, right? Not too shabby. I'm gonna go to my next layer, so my medium, sweet, select everything in there, because why would I wanna sit there and select all of those lines? So sweet, I've got that one. Obviously I don't want orange. Maybe something about the same, maybe a little bit lighter. And maybe a little bit darker, or sorry, a little bit more weight. So, I don't know, 0.55. That's a little bit more. And as you can see, it changed that one. Doesn't look like it got everything, but according to the computer, it did. So I don't know, I like to get all the lines before I sort of investigate, or you know, I see stuff that they're like there, but they're not there. And oh, it's because it's in a different layer that I thought that I got in the right layer. So, but one line at a time, or one layer at a time, I should say. I know that this one's going to be my thick line weight, so I'm going to go with something a little bit darker. I mean, well, actually it's going to get thicker, so I don't know, maybe that weight will kind of naturally balance itself out. So I don't know, maybe about the same as my medium. And that one's going to be pretty big. I don't like to go outside of 1 point, especially at this scale on 11 by 17 paper, but just to kind of show you what it does, let's go with like 1.5. Really thickens that up, right? And we start to have a really nice contrast between our lines. That's exactly what we're going for. And to be fair, much more manipulatable and easier to, I think, use than even analog drafting. I mean, let's face it, if I get it wrong, analog drafting, I gotta erase the whole thing, I gotta try again. In this case, well, I can just take a step back and look at it. Oh, I don't like it. Try a different one, right? Try a different line weight. I don't know, maybe it is a little too thick for me. So I'm gonna try that again and maybe go with 1.2. Sweet. Much better, at least for myself. Next layer. Again, thank goodness I kept those. Maybe I do want to keep those blue. Maybe I do want an accent color, I don't know. But for the sake of having a black and white drawing, let's just keep it simple. I'm gonna go pretty thick on those too. Maybe like a 0.88. I do want them to stand out, but not more than my object, and that's working pretty well. All those lines that I did, maybe that's my accent color. That'd be kind of cool. But again, I'll keep it simple for today and just make them a little bit lighter and a little bit less weight. Sweet, not too bad. And again, just layer by layer. Oh, there's that layer I feel like I was missing the whole time. Again, double click. How easy is that? Arguably easier than Rhino. Trust me. That is way too thin. Let's go with 0.44. Honestly, sometimes I just guess the weight. And that's looking pretty good so far. I mean, that would have taken, honestly, all day if I was drafting it. I mean, let's face it. Now I can do it within the span of an hour, and I could do a multitude of them. I could do this 800 times for my professor and show him or her every single one, right? So again, the reason I show you guys these tools is of course for Studio. Now don't get me wrong, I need to probably add some text, and I'll let you guys figure that out because it's honestly pretty intuitive. And no, you don't have to use Pig Latin or whatever that is. I think it's kind of funny. But yes, you do want to label things, you do want to be specific about your steps, because eventually that's what we want to talk about and pin up, right? Is this communicating your object effectively, right? Are you really showing how to make that bowl of cereal, or is somebody kind of confused between step 2 and step 3, right? Anyway, for the most part, that really is about the gist of the entire exercise. Like I said, it can be done in one really hour, and especially if you're not talking as much as I am, right? Anyway, questions, comments, concerns. This is definitely the time to ask, and what I would say, like I was saying last time, or at least to my other class, write them down as I go, right? You might forget, or like, oh, what was that thing he did during step 2? I really need to ask him about that because, well, everybody else in the class might be afraid to ask the same question, right? There's really not a wrong question here, and to be completely fair, I might not even know your answer, right? We might have to go find it, and often that's another thing I like to put on the video too, some of the resources of where to find these answers, especially if I can't even answer them, right? Usually it's Reddit or some other forum, Grasshopper forums, and quite literally maybe even sometimes realizing nobody's ran into this problem and I have to ask the forum myself. There's some experts out there that, again, they do this every single day, right? And they know that vocabulary. So if you're using that vocabulary too, they're going to know what you're talking about, right? Questions? Yes, sir. I went ahead and ungrouped them. Great question. Right, so if you see it's not exploding, go ahead and try ungroup. Sometimes it works the other way around too. You might have to, yeah, there you go. Very good question. Any others, guys? Fair enough. Hopefully a really nice introduction to Rhino, especially if you've never modeled anything before. I know a lot of us have 2D practice and things like that, but I know three-dimensional can be sort of kind of off-putting, like, oh no, what do I do? Did you get 1G?
No.
Oh no.
Thank you.
Sweet. Other than that, any other questions, guys? All right, I'll go ahead and stop this recording.